So I went to South Korea recently. I used to come to Korea several times a year for business travel, but my last trip was almost 15 years ago. So I was seriously impressed. Not just that the bidet toilets now come with an enema button, but also by how good the Seoul Metro has become. I took a lot of trains while I was there. Not just to the touristy stuff, but also to filming locations in dozens of neighborhoods and cities all around Seoul. Getting to all of these places wasn't just possible by metro, it was also extremely fast, convenient, and actually enjoyable because of the way the whole system works together. Like, there is so much great public transit design visible in just this one clip alone that I'd probably need a whole YouTube video to explain it all, so I guess we better get started. Seoul is a city that experienced extremely rapid urbanization. In my previous video about Cheongyecheong, I showed that this is what the area looked like in the 1950s, and this is what it looked like by the 1970s. Absolutely, wildly fast growth. And yet in 1970, there was no metro system here. None at all. Metro Line 1 was the first to open in 1974. Now it's one of the top 5 largest metro systems in the world, with a higher yearly ridership than Paris, London, or New York. In fact, New York is the only one of those 3 that has more stations than Seoul, but as I'll make it clear in this video, it's almost embarrassing to compare any of those other systems to here because of how good it is. This is the latest Seoul Metro map. It's relatively easy to read and understand, at least on a metro with this many lines and stations, but it hides just how extensive this system really is. You can see that Line 1 goes from Shincheon to Yeoncheon, which looks impressive enough on this map, but when you look at where these places actually are, it's crazy. These 2 stations are 150 kilometers apart, so this isn't just a metro for Seoul, it's for the entire region. The train system is exceptionally well integrated, and the trains really blur the lines between commuter trains, intercity trains, and metro trains, with several lines acting as multiple different types of service at different points along their route. There are also express trains on some lines, allowing faster travel from farther stations, while stopping only at transfer stations and popular destinations along the line. The trains arrive very frequently, as often as every 2 to 3 minutes during rush hour and every 5 to 6 minutes at other times. Some outer suburban branches have trains arriving every 10 minutes or so. Public transit works best when it arrives so frequently that there's no point in looking at a schedule. You just show up at the station and take the next train. I never had to wait long for a train in the Seoul region, even when going to locations far outside of the city. I expected travel to, from, and within Seoul to be extremely efficient. These urban lines are so comprehensive and depart so often that it was trivially easy to get to where I wanted to go. What impressed me, though, was that traveling between suburbs and satellite cities was also very easy. I didn't need to travel into Seoul, transfer to another line, and go back out again like is so common in other cities, because here there are several lines connecting across the network, even through the surrounding cities. One of the most amazing things about the Seoul Metro is that they have had platform screen doors at every station since 2009. These are a luxury on most other metro systems, reserved only for a handful of new stations. But most cities don't have any platform doors at all, even on new lines. I've seen so many plans for new metro lines that have platform screen doors, but they're always the first thing to be cut to save money, which is extremely short-sighted. The most obvious benefit is safety. You can't fall onto the tracks if there's a wall there. And when Seoul installed platform screen doors, average annual fatalities dropped from 37.1 to 0.4. Think about that for a second. Every year, over 30 people were dying on the metro here, and now there are years where it's 0. That should already be reason enough for cities to build platform screen doors everywhere, but there are even more benefits than that I don't often see people talking about. Garbage falling onto the tracks can damage equipment, cause electrical shorts, and even start fires if it comes into contact with the third rail. And when this happens, it needs to be cleared manually, causing delays. But the rats love it. Garbage gets blown around by the wind from the train entering the station, but these walls cut down on that significantly, which makes it easier for staff to keep the station clean. Even when the walls aren't high enough to totally isolate the station from the tracks, they still block a lot of noise from the train. Something the New York City subway could really benefit from in particular. Metro trains are electric and pretty clean running, but they still create particulate pollution, especially from their brakes. And in Seoul, PM10 particulate levels dropped 20% when platform doors were installed. Blocking the air from the tracks also makes air conditioning more efficient, and the Metro now saves over 15 billion won, or about 10 million euros per year, in air conditioning costs alone. Platform screen doors will easily pay for themselves in lower cooling costs, maintenance costs, and the cost of delays, which is why it's always so infuriating and short-sighted when they're cut from a new metro construction as a way to reduce costs. As if saving people's lives and making the metro more comfortable weren't already reason enough. The only problem I have with platform screen doors is that my arriving train clips are much less interesting than they are on other metro systems. Ultimately, Seoul doesn't do anything that's totally unique, and you will see many of these elements on metro systems in other Asian cities, but I feel like the Seoul Metro has taken the best features from every other metro system and then implemented them really well with careful attention to detail. Now that every station has platform screen doors, Seoul is in the process of rolling out automatic safety platforms like these to prevent tripping accidents. There's no need to mind the gap when there isn't a gap anymore. The absolute best part about platform screen doors, though, is that people know exactly where to stand so that they can wait out of the way of the door and let people off the train before boarding, which makes the whole boarding process so much more efficient. This also means that it's known in advance where the train will stop and where the doors will be, which means that every door is labeled with the carriage and door number of the train. All of this information is tightly integrated into the navigation apps, especially the Korean ones like Kakao Metro and Naver Maps. Incidentally, Google Maps does not work properly in South Korea. It gives directions that are totally wrong sometimes. I guess the American mind cannot comprehend a transit system of this magnitude, so software programmed by Americans cannot keep up. Here you can see that the app is recommending that I board at door 7-1 for the most efficient trip, so I wait at the door marked 7-1. And when I arrive at my station, the escalator is right in front of me. This doesn't just make it faster to take the metro, I also found it was much harder to get lost because I just went up whatever escalator was directly in front of me. It also makes everything so much more efficient as there aren't a bunch of people trying to walk past each other on a narrow platform because most people are already where they need to be. So I found that rush hour in Seoul was definitely busy, but everything was very efficient and I never felt uncomfortable. There are two jingles played in the Seoul Metro when a train is approaching. There's this one that plays when the arriving train is going inbound, usually towards Seoul, and this one that plays when the train is going outbound or back towards the origin station. So if you pay attention, you can know if you're on the right platform. These songs are very famous in Seoul and everybody will recognize them. This American guy went viral by dancing to them on TikTok. Nice moves. There is also another song that plays on the train when you're approaching a transfer station. And of course, people have danced to that one too. The transfer song changed a few years ago and people were really upset about it as they liked the previous one more. Which is pretty funny, but I'm glad people are passionate about their subway jingles. These songs might seem kind of frivolous, but they're really not. They're a subtle way of improving wayfinding, that is, how to get around the metro system without being overly intrusive. After riding the metro in Seoul for a few weeks, it's really hard to go back to a system that doesn't do wayfinding properly. Wayfinding and signage is so often an afterthought on many other metro systems, But here in Seoul, it's really well done. Every exit to every station is numbered for easy navigation. The signs for the platform show not just the end station, but also popular destinations along the line so you know which direction to go in. And larger stations have colored lines on the ground that you can follow to get to the correct platform. Inside the train are LCD screens that show which station is coming up next and which lines you can transfer to. And at every station it's very clear which side of the train the doors will open. Again, many of these things are found on other modern metro systems, but they have obviously put a lot of effort into getting the wayfinding right here. And it's really, really easy to navigate the Seoul Metro as a result. There is mobile phone service available on all the trains, and many of them have free Wi-Fi as well. And if you find the air conditioning too cold, you can get a lightly air-conditioned car. I saw a few lines that had room for bicycles, usually at the far end of the train, but it was pretty rare to see anybody with a bicycle most of the time. I've talked mostly about metro trains, but the train system in Seoul really blurs the line between the metro trains and the heavy rail trains, and the complete system is made up of many different rail lines. Some are managed by the city of Seoul, others by KORail, the national train operator, and some by the regional cities. But that complexity is completely hidden from anybody riding the trains because transfers are seamless, and the same T-money payment card is used for everything. I also like how in busy stations, the fare gates are open by default and only close if there's a problem with your card, which means I never had to wait for the gate to open. It was annoying that I had to load up my T-money card with cash because I didn't have a Korean bank account, but that's obviously not an issue for the people who live there. And the locals can also pay by tapping their phone. And yeah, lots of cities have transit cards that work everywhere. The OV chip card in the Netherlands works on all public transit in the entire country, which is amazing, and the Netherlands has started upgrading payment readers so that you can pay by tapping a credit card, debit card, or phone so that you don't need a transit card at all. But the one thing the T-money card has going for it is that you can buy cute versions of them. Checkmate, Netherlands. This card also works on buses and trains all over the country, which is really convenient. Though for some long-distance and high-speed trains, you still need to buy a separate ticket and seat reservation. I booked tickets for several high-speed trains, and I was reminded of the one thing the Korean rail companies are really bad at: websites. The user interface, the performance, the stability, everything is so bad. I wasn't able to book any of the tickets I wanted for the SRT trains, and I was left wondering, were they really sold out, or was the website just so bad that everything just looked like it was sold out? And I had to use a VPN for pretty much everything because the KORail website would load really slowly or sometimes wouldn't load at all unless I was coming from a Korean IP address. But eventually I was able to book tickets on the KTX high-speed trains, and thankfully KORail is a lot better at operating trains than websites. The trains felt very similar to the Japanese Shinkansen, though they're built by a Korean company. The ride was very smooth and comfortable at nearly 300 kilometers per hour, as you would expect from a modern high-speed train. Nice views of the Korean countryside too. And while the train didn't have a bar car, it did have vending machines, so I could get some corn tea. All in all, the train to Busan was comfortable, efficient, and reliable, and there weren't even any zombies. Despite already having one of the best metro systems in the world, Seoul is still actively building new lines. This is really important because when you build a metro line, the people who worked on it become very good at building metro lines. So the best thing you can do is to immediately put them on another metro project. I talked about this in my video about Taipei, which is another city that is constantly building new metro lines at all times. There are too many cities that build their metro systems in bursts, with several years in between projects, so that expertise is lost and people move on to different jobs. Which means that when it's time to start up the next metro project, none of that expertise is available, and the city is stuck paying experts and dealing with inexperienced people who make mistakes, which makes everything take longer and makes the project more expensive. In Seoul, there are several new metro, train, and tram lines under construction, and a few metro line extensions too, plus another half-dozen lines in the early planning process. The most interesting project is the Great Train Express, which sounds much less silly if you just say GTX. These are very high-speed commuter trains that bring people in from the satellite towns, and some of the network has already opened. While these are technically heavy rail commuter trains that run every 15 to 30 minutes, they run entirely underground like a metro, and they have a top speed of 180 kilometers per hour, which makes them faster than intercity trains in many other countries. These trains are absolutely amazing, and since they've opened, commute times from satellite cities have been cut in half. My 32-kilometer trip from Puntan to Suso Station in Seoul took only 21 minutes and cost less than €3. It's actually insane how advanced this is compared to the projects being proposed in Europe. And of course, it's so far ahead of anything in the US and Canada that they're basically living in the Stone Ages by comparison. The first part of the project, the GTX-A, opened recently, and these are the trains that I took while I was there. Next year, they plan to complete this segment between Seoul and Suso, turning this into one 82-kilometer-long high-speed commuter rail line that's entirely underground. But this is only part of the project because the GTX-B and GTX-C are already under construction. When they're completed in 2030 and 2028 respectively, there will be 3 lines connecting major cities all around the region, with a triangle cutting through the center of the city, making it easy to reach most major destinations within Seoul extremely quickly. When you realize that all of the other metro lines I've been talking about are still on top of all of this, it becomes clear that the Seoul region has a transit system that will continue to be one of the best in the world. The only problem I have with the GTX trains is that they are very, very far underground, by necessity, which means taking a lot of escalators to get to and from the trains. Of course, this also lets them be used as emergency shelters. There are actually many stations in Seoul that are set up for emergency use, with gas masks, emergency water, and firefighting equipment available at several metro stations. South Korea is always prepared because they've had some issues with their crazy authoritarian neighbor. Canadians, you might want to take notes. The metro stations in Seoul are, for the most part, very clean and well maintained. And they really want you to know that the air was clean, with these giant air filters prominently displayed at some stations. Many stations have shops and restaurants inside the stations, and convenience stores too. They also have restrooms that are completely free. Might want to take a hint there, Europe. As I was passing through Seoul Station very late at night, I saw some people sleeping in the corridor, but interestingly, I didn't see this at any other station in the city. One of the metrics I use to judge a transit system is how pedestrian-friendly it is when you exit the stations. People taking the metro shouldn't be dropped off at the side of a busy road like this station in Montreal, or this one in Toronto. Sometimes the exits are very good in the Seoul region. A lot of the stations are connected to offices and shopping buildings, and I passed through several that had small businesses too, which is great. A metro station is going to be a place where thousands of people come through on foot, and so it should be designed to be easy to walk through with many useful destinations along the way. Some exits bring you to smaller streets and even pedestrianized areas. For example, this station exit is great, and it brings you directly to Jongnyui Line Forest Park. This park is completely pedestrianized, and it's really nice. There used to be a rail line through here, but it was buried, and the space has now been made into a linear park that connects to several metro stations. If you take the Airport Express train into Seoul, you will travel under here. Unfortunately, there are a lot of metro exits that bring you out to very busy and very wide arterial roads, which felt very similar to a lot of the metro exits in Taipei. In some cases, the sidewalks were very wide, which made these exits slightly better, but I'd really like to see more of these wide sidewalks separated from the road by a line of trees, like this sidewalk in Tokyo. Some exits like this one were really bad though, just a narrow sidewalk on a busy road. It didn't surprise me that most of the shops were out of business here because it kinda sucks to be here. But this really gets to a major problem I have in Seoul. There are a lot of places that are really unpleasant to be in outside of a car. Seoul urbanized extremely rapidly after the war, and they wanted to build a modern city, which in the 1950s meant wide roads and elevated highways because cars were considered the technology of the future. Since then, urban planners have learned the hard way that cars are a terribly inefficient method of transportation within cities, and Seoul has been trying to undo a lot of the damage that has been caused by car infrastructure. They have already removed or repurposed several elevated expressways, and I talked about 2 of them in one of my previous videos. They have also built several BRT or bus rapid transit lines in the middle of the oversized boulevard to speed up the buses, but there is still a lot of work to be done. South Korea has an influential automobile industry with a lot of political power, and as well as decades of building wide roads and lots of car-centric infrastructure. And there is a strong culture of cars as status symbols too, which means most of the city is designed to put drivers first, ahead of everyone else. Seoul has some absolutely massive intersections with extremely long light cycles. In order to make the wait more comfortable, some pedestrian crossings have these huge umbrellas to shade people waiting at the traffic lights. These are great, of course, but it would be even better if you didn't have to wait so long just to cross the street. Out of all the countries I've visited in the past few years, I never needed to spend as much time waiting at traffic lights as I did in Korea. This traffic light near my hotel was ridiculous. Almost every time I wanted to cross, I would wait for this left turn arrow for cars with about 24 other people, even when there were no cars turning left. I actually found it really unpleasant to walk many places in Seoul because everything was designed to move as many cars as possible at the expense of everybody else. This scramble intersection was cool, but given how many more people are walking here compared to driving, it really should trigger every light cycle instead of needing to wait for cars to go in every direction first. And there were so many needlessly large intersections, even on neighborhood streets. This place has really been ruined by excessive traffic engineering. Though at least they did have these neat little lights on the ground so that you can notice the signal has finally changed, even if you're looking at your phone. While the metro system is one of the best in the world, the surface transit is not particularly enjoyable. I believe that the best kind of surface transportation for city is trams, and I made a previous video about that. Unfortunately, Seoul does not have any trams at all. Like most cities, they used to have trams, but they were all torn out in the 1960s. However, there is a tram line currently under construction and scheduled to open in September of 2025. And I honestly think the only reason they waited so long to build one is because there wasn't a Korean company making trams until recently. But until then, all surface transportation in Seoul is buses. The bus system is very extensive, with a wide range of different bus routes that go all over the region, and the buses are color-coded too. There's even a kids show called Tayo the Little Bus where every character is a different color bus in Seoul. It's like the British show Chuggington, but for buses. Blue buses are for trunk lines that go across the city and into the suburbs. These are the buses that are most commonly seen in the dedicated BRT lanes. Red buses are rapid express buses for long-distance commuting between downtown Seoul and the surrounding cities. Green buses are for shorter branch lines, usually for connecting between the trunk routes and the subway station and bus stations outside of downtown. And finally, yellow buses are for smaller circular routes that connect to important destinations within a limited area, though when I visited, the only yellow bus I took was pink. Cute seats though. So in that sense, the bus network in Seoul is phenomenal, with bus service reaching nearly every part of Seoul and the surrounding region. Which sounds great in theory, but I really did not enjoy taking the bus in Seoul. The buses bounced and rocked around a lot, which is common on many buses, but they were also very, very often stuck in traffic and stuck at red lights, which made them much slower than they should be, and they were rarely on schedule as a result. Even in the dedicated BRT lanes, the buses would routinely get stuck at red lights, plus the BRT stations were in the middle of giant roads, and I spent a lot of time waiting at red lights and crossing the road to get to and from the platforms. Taking the bus really should be better here, but there's still way too much of a focus on moving cars in Seoul than on providing priority to public transit vehicles. After a few days, I started avoiding the bus as much as possible and took the metro instead, even if the route was supposedly shorter by bus in Naver Maps. The metro is fantastic here, but on the surface, cars are a serious problem for public transit. Ultimately, every city needs to be doing more to reduce the number of cars in the city, especially in busy urban areas, and that needs to include both alternatives to driving, but also policies that actively discourage the use of cars. For example, Tokyo has a lot of wide roads, but they usually have much less car traffic on them than in Seoul, and that's because specific policies have been put in place to discourage people from driving in Tokyo. For example, the urban freeways have tolls, the streets are designed to discourage through traffic, and on-street parking is extremely rare. Vehicle registration and licensing is more expensive in Japan than in South Korea, and it's not even possible to buy a car in Japan unless you can prove that you have a place to park it that's not on the street. Which is a big reason why the small streets in Japan are really comfortable to walk on and sidewalks aren't even necessary, because there are so few cars, and I made a previous video about that if you'd like to learn more. There are some nice streets like that in Seoul that are nice to walk on, but most of them are not because they have too much car traffic and too much on-street parking. It's always insane to me to see a street like this with 100 people walking on it without issue, but it gets completely jammed up by like 6 people in cars. Cars just don't fit in great urban places, and trying to make them fit destroys what makes those places great. This isn't even an ideological position, it's just a matter of geometry. Seoul has provided plenty of incentives to get people out of cars, like their extensive transit system, but that will only take them so far. Now they need to move on to the more politically difficult projects of making it less desirable to drive. And that's always going to be more difficult in a country with a very strong and influential automobile industry. But despite that, progress is being made. For example, I was really happy to see how much better the streets are outside of Hongyi University Station. This is so much nicer than it was before. This whole area is improving a lot, and it was great to see what Hongdae looks like these days. Several streets have been blocked off to cars at certain times of the day, and these streets are now a major destination for the city. Plus, Hongdae has my absolute favorite Hangul character ever, the one that looks like a snowman wearing a top hat. Over the past decade, Seoul has pedestrianized several new streets and extended others, which is really great to see. Though in some cases, cars are still allowed even in places where they really shouldn't be. It's insane to me that cars are still allowed to go through this part of Ikseondong at night. But overall, things are definitely moving in the right direction, and I am seriously impressed by how much the city has improved since the last time I was here 15 years ago. I really want to come back when all of the GTX lines are open. And if they keep building more of these pedestrianization projects, Seoul could easily become one of the world's nicest cities. Now, if only they could do something about those websites. I can't even count the number of times I needed to use a VPN during this trip. The Korail website was definitely one of the worst offenders, but there were lots of other Korean websites that either wouldn't load or wouldn't load properly if I wasn't coming from a Korean IP address. Which is why I am very glad to have NordVPN, the sponsor of this video, and an app I consider absolutely essential for travel. Our flight to Korea went through Doha, and during our layover, I learned that Signal Messenger is blocked in Qatar. So I needed NordVPN just to let my mom know we arrived safely. And while I was in Korea, lots of websites would helpfully show me the page I wanted in machine-translated Korean, even though the original site was in English. So I would connect to a NordVPN server in an English-speaking country instead. Several years ago, I started using NordVPN whenever I traveled so that I could connect more privately on public Wi-Fi networks. Sure, most websites use SSL encryption these days, but anybody who has access to the router still knows exactly which websites you're visiting. And that's how I learned that lots of public Wi-Fi networks change the speed of your connection depending on which sites you're accessing. This is especially common with video sites, so I found many times that YouTube can actually load faster through NordVPN. And NordVPN is the fastest VPN available according to independent speed tests. It's ridiculous how many geographic restrictions are baked into the internet these days, like video streaming platforms that change what videos you can watch based on your location. So, as far as I'm concerned, a VPN is more useful today than it's ever been, and I automatically connect to NordVPN on every Wi-Fi network I use when I'm traveling. And since I can use my NordVPN account on up to 6 devices, I use it on my laptop, my phone, and all of the devices that my kids use as well. If you're interested in giving it a try, you can use the link nordvpn.com/notjustbikes to sign up to NordVPN with a significant discount. And you'll also get 4 extra months for free if you opt for a 2-year subscription. And if for some reason you're not as satisfied with it as I am, they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Thanks for watching, and thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video.